my friends. Some very interesting things have happened since we got together last. Among other things, I've been on the road for 9 days, and so we really didn't have a chance to generate our usual kind of PostScript insight. But on returning, suddenly there was this kind of grand cluster of things that all came together that are really quite interesting and impressive. Now, I've said for a long time that as we go further into this space, into this transition space, that there is necessarily all the powers that play in that space are going to increase their activity and the amplitude and the significance and the uh, energy of all of what they do, because what it really appears is that there's an end point here, that the game ends somewhere around 2027 maybe, or 2029. But in any case, somewhere out in the not too distant future, there is a reset of this whole thing. And so there's this exponential kind of increase in activity by all powers that are playing in the space to try to dominate, capture, solidify their position. Well, there's still some money on the table, I guess. And I don't know exactly what that means, but that's what it seems to be. That's what it feels like. And we can talk about the potential kind of events, downstream events. We'll talk about some other events. But in any case, I am convinced that there is a general awareness at a very high levels where they pull the levers for, in general, for this planet, that there is some very significant, extraordinary event that, if you will, resets everything in a sense. And again, I don't know exactly what that is. We can speculate about that and talk about it some other time. But this is moving kind of exponentially higher. And the best example of that is that 10 days ago, Cliff High, who, as most people listen to this kind of a program would know, who has this computer program that broadly goes across the whole internet with billions of web bots and extracts the use of language in multiple languages, but it analyzes how people are, the vocabulary and the new words and the energy associated with what they're speaking about, and has been able to turn that into an impressively predictive kind of capability. The basic notion is that humans are intrinsically psychic, and that to one degree or another, we all have a sensitivity to the things that are inbound. And the way that we manifest that is that we start using different words and different vocabulary. And we unknowingly change how we speak, and it's not explicit. We don't talk about the event per se, but the things that we do talk about, we talk about it in a different way, and that can all be tracked and plotted and clustered and analyzed. Now, Cliff High's process of analyzation has a number of metrics associated with this, and the one that starts to get him a sense of the magnitude of what the inbound event is is associated with the difference between the kind of increasing energy associated with the kind of language that people use before the event, and then the difference in the language that they use after the event. And he has got it all wired up, and he's got metrics and all kinds of algorithms and stuff. And what he can tell you is that the largest difference, numerical difference between this entry language, between the emergence and the energy on the backside of the event, has been something like 8.853. That's just happens to be the number. And that is what happened with 9/11. And so 9/11, the biggest number in 9/11 is 8.853, which was huge in terms of its rapid kind of impact and the way that it lingered and changed in the world after that. That is important. This 8.853 is important because what Cliff now has is an event that he sees before the end of the year that is 13 times higher, stronger, larger than this 8.853. Something appears to be inbound that is 13 times more of the impact and the significance of than 9/11. And so he kind of raised the flag and the warning on that in a video that he put out about 10 days ago. And what he said in passing was that he had been talking to the best remote viewers on the planet, and they were getting similar kind of input in their remote viewing. Now, in my business of trying to think about the future and systematizing it and kind of in some kind of an organized or way to do this, is what you essentially do is you look for clustering. One random kind of data point by itself, even though it might be significant in the case of somebody like Cliff. Hi, Cliff's been wrong multiple times. And so you can't hang your hat on that. Even though it's really quite large, and it's hard, quite large is an understatement. And you'd be foolish to ignore it and just poo-poo the whole thing because it's so big. It's such an anomaly. But nevertheless, it's a single data point. But then what I do in these kinds of things is I start to kind of run my trap lines. And I go out to all the different other kind of sources that I know that I have a degree of confidence in being able to see into the future in one way or another. And that's effectively what Cliff did. He went to the remote viewers, and what he found was, and at the time he couldn't talk about the details, but he said they're seeing essentially the same thing, articulated differently. And he suggested that we'd have to wait around another day or two to find out what the remote viewers had to say. Well, I plugged into the remote viewers. The 4 of them, or 5 of them really, are spread around the world in different places that are part of the network. And it was fascinating to look at the response from their targeting. And what they saw was commonly things like a big mushroom cloud, a big explosion, lots of people running away, two or three of them had big kind of control rooms with a lot of people watching and kind of monitoring what was going on. And kind of the implication was that they were controlling this thing and influencing it and turning it on. And they too said, you know, this is really rather extraordinary. As a matter of fact, they had not even targeted this particular event. They had targeted something else. And all four of the major, five of them really, who responded to this target, all were diverted over to this major event that happened because it dominated the space. And it, although it had nothing to do, it was not directly associated with the target that they were actively looking at. And so you get now a couple of data points and you say, wow, that's kind of interesting, because now you get a little granularity that you don't get from Cliff High. He really doesn't know what it might be at this point. As he gets closer, he ought to get a little bit more information. But you get some granularity in explosions, and you get pictures of that imply that it's probably a false flag of one sort or another, that it has been orchestrated and that it's being monitored, and they're trying to see how it all plays out. So then I decided, I'm gonna need to go look at this in a couple of other places, and so I went to Penny Kelly and I just got her on the phone and said, Penny, somebody told me that you think that there's some big thing that's happening before the end of the year. She said, oh, yeah. I said, so tell me about it. She said, it's a big event. It's mid-September. When is that? Like now. Through October. Something happens in there. And what she said is that there's giant upheaval in the United States, and the president goes away. Biden goes away. And at the top of the U.S. government is completely kind of cleaned off. And she says it's a cooperative thing, that both the Republicans and the Democrats have come together and support it. And the Democrats support it because if they don't, the whole Democratic Party would have collapsed. And the Republicans support it because they believe that it has effectively put off a civil war in the United States. So now you got to stop and say, wait a second. So what in the world might precipitate all of that? And what she says is that the precursive sequence that she saw was something like, and there are two kind of converging factors. One of which was that there were bank failures, maybe obviously a series of them, and probably big ones, that in and of itself would get the attention and the apprehension of a lot of people, and kind of set the stage, if you will, for potential kind of civil war. I forgot to mention to you that Cliff High said that he thought that he wouldn't be surprised that if as many as a third of the major banks in the country failed before the end of the year. So now you've got banks that are showing up in a couple of different kind of locations, sources. But more than that, kind of the catalytic event from Penny Kelly's scenario was that the United States, acting presumably through Ukraine, had bombed Sevastopol in the Crimea, and which is the Russian port and the home of the Black Sea Fleet, and has been for them for years, decades, and that crossed the very definite red line, and that the Russians had essentially said, we're going to take out New York or Chicago or London or someplace because we told you not to do this. And that is the event that kind of got the attention of the leadership of this government in this country, and encouraged them to do some house cleaning. So then I went to my friend Chris Robinson over in England, who dreams about the future. Chris has an extraordinary track record working with Scotland Yard and MI5 and MI6 to anticipate when extraordinary events are happening in the UK. And in particular, he anticipated every time the NRA, the Irish Republican, the IRA, were bombed in London. And you'll remember that that's been quite some time ago, but he was able to tell them beforehand exactly when and where the bombing was going to take place, so much so that the authorities were able to kind of pick off the bombers or allow them to bomb something and nobody would get hurt so that they could then, follow them or whatever they did. I don't know. But Chris, who calls himself the Dream Detective, rapidly agreed to be targeted around this area. And for 3 nights, he dreamed about what might be coming, what might be inbound. And he too got some dramatic kind of event of one sort. He got a couple of kind of responses. The way he thinks about this and the way this works is before he goes to sleep, he writes down the questions that he wants to have the answers to, and then he dreams, and he dreams in symbols. He has a symbol set that he understands so that he can accurately interpret what the meaning is. And so he too came up with some kind of a major event. It was not very distinct, but it clearly suggested that there was kind of something out there. And so to my way of thinking, what I've got is 4 different kind of sources, unconventional for sure, but certainly with a track record and some credibility, all who are saying something big is inbound. Maybe as soon as between now and the end of the year. What the remote viewers say that it's somewhere within the next year. And Cliff High, in an interview where he was responding to questions about this, said that the event in his framework, from the history, is inevitable. You would not get the input. You would not get the kind of input that he sees if for some reason people changed their mind and it didn't happen. It might get shifted and changed from what it originally was, which he admitted was his purpose in trying to generate some awareness around this, because what he felt was that if enough people knew about it and it kind of built itself into a reasonable kind of alternative, that it would no longer be the surprise that what the deep state needed in order to pull this thing off, because people would be questioning it from the beginning, and it would not look like what they had hoped it would look like, and it wouldn't generate the response that they hoped that it would generate. And so I started to think about the thing and say, okay, what kind of an event, what kinds of events might qualify for something that is 13 times larger than the effect of 9/11? That's not insignificant. I mean, that is 9/11 was a really, really, really big deal for all of us, for the whole country, and for the world, for that matter. It generated the whole war on terror and all that kind of business. And to try to imagine what might be inbound that would be, you know, an order of magnitude larger than that, it's really knocks out a whole lot of small stuff for the usual kind of things that you'd typically talk about. And so I sat down and built a list of the kind of the things that kind of are in the ballpark of something like that. One of them would be a nuclear war, of course. And Penny's indications suggest that that might be one of the things that were on the table. In this, in the particular case, if it was an actual event, then, it sounds like somebody sent off a missile and, really took out a big piece of Manhattan or something. I don't know. But anyway, it would have to be quite large. It could not be a kind of a localized thing, kind of a show of force kind of thing that off in Ukraine somewhere, probably. There's a chance, and if they did it right, and there's certainly a lot of people making noises about the thing, that they would do a new pandemic, and the one that was significantly more presumably virulent than the last one, and certainly the effects of which they would try to make far more have more powerful and constraining and than the last one. Again, if you were trying to follow a thread here through this, you would you couldn't just do another COVID, because people are we're onto that. A lot of people are onto that. Donald Trump has stood up and said, we will not conform, clearly there are a lot of folks who are standing up against it, and clearly getting the interest, the attention of the deep state. I mean, they've gone after what's his name, Brand, the Brit, and in any case, there's, the energy is increasing here. This is getting more shrill in terms of the way they're responding to the thing. There could be an assassination, a big assassination, maybe RFK Jr. or Putin or something along that line. That would certainly send shockwaves throughout the whole system. And but if it was Putin, for sure, it would just reset everything, because now they'd 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 go to general quarters and they'd come after us. I would think that would be my guess. The bank failure scenario has the potential of being something of this magnitude. If there started to be this run on the biggest banks in this country, it would roll through the whole financial system and generate huge amounts of fear throughout the system. People would be unable to very large things, pension funds, other kinds of things would not be able to pay pensions and on and on. The effect would be giant and it would affect everyone. And so, unlike maybe some of these other things where there would be highly concentrated in one area with effects around the world, a banking failure would get everybody's attention at just about every level. Of course, you could have the false flag of an alien attack. A week or so ago, sometime 8 or 10 days ago, I sat down and I listened to a speech that Stephen Greer had given a couple of years ago about, of course, UFOs and aliens, which is what Stephen Greer talks about. And one of the things that Greer talked about with some level, a great deal of certainty, not speculation, was that the United States has the capability to do large-scale projection, like in the sky and on the ground and other such things of events, and to the extent that he said 99.99% of the people would absolutely believe that it was true. And it would be impossible to convince them otherwise because they had seen it and the things had blown up and people had done this. And, it'd be like a movie. It'd be like one of these action movies. That's not far-fetched. There are plenty of indicators that could be pointing toward the possibility of something like that. Not least of which the growing interest of the U.S. government in these UFOs and aliens, and how it's raised itself in the public awareness to where it's rather commonly talked about today. And so then the question is, can they turn it to where it is a threat such that they can execute it and then drive everybody, because they're very afraid, drive them over toward, all of the things that they're lining up, including central bank digital currency and so on, and whatever, all these kind of controlling things. And if the banks were failing at the same time or something like that, then you could get a guaranteed income from the government. I don't know, but there's a bunch of kind of things that could play in there. One possibility, a new one, is the possibility of some kind of an AI-based event. Now, it would have to be very large and rather strange, or a great, attention getting, in order to qualify for 13 times 9/11. But AI is running. What you've got to remember is that none of this kind of technology that has this extraordinary capability like AI is unknown to the intelligence community and the government and the black programs and other kinds of things. A common kind of metric that's used is that things that show up in the white world, up in the public, have been around under the table for 50 to 70 years. May not be the case with AI because AI has been moving so fast, and so the kind of acceleration curve may be greater. But it would not be surprising at all to me that there have been very robust and capable programs that have been operating under the table, and then the black programs for a decade, maybe 2 decades. And so just sit there and think about that for a minute and ask yourself what level of capability has it come and is available to these kinds of folks that we don't know anything about at all. And so something like that could either get out of hand or it could be used in some kind of strange way that you had never thought about before. I mean, we're into this really strange place where there are things that like they've never happened any time before. There's a variation about one of these things is the possibility of a volcano or a major earthquake. I mean, they've been playing with this kind of stuff, certainly with these fires and things. They're essentially pulling out everything out of their trick bag, and they're throwing it against the wall in a sense to see what sticks. Which one pulls, can change the direction where things are going right now. By the way, Cliff High and Martin Armstrong both say that this is doomed to failure. These guys will never be able to solidify all of this and pull off what they're trying to do, and that's the bright light at the end of the tunnel here. But it's getting from here to there in the short term. But in the short term, they clearly can do large scale weather manipulation and earth changes, earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, and other such things. And maybe that's one of the things. One of them, interestingly enough, could be the possibility that you would have extraordinary revelations about secrets that have been kept under the table for all of this time. If I don't think it's an energy device, but it's the only thing that comes to mind right now. But if suddenly somebody spilled the beans or it cracked and came out and said we've got free energy device, and it's been, we've been using them on satellites and other kinds of things for decades now, and so we really know how to do this. And everybody says, you've been lying? You mean you've been keeping this away from us for all these decades and so on? Yeah, maybe something like that. I don't know. That's probably not big enough to make that happen, but there might be something else that one of these kind of secrets that come out, maybe influenced by the ultimately, maybe not in the short term, but maybe a year from now it could be different from the fact that the government would start getting into the position that they couldn't pay the bills because people were not paying taxes. And so they're starting to have to lay people off and within the agencies and the bureaucracy. And then some of these people who have been trying to figure out a way in which to pay the bills and feed their families start looking around like they did at the breakup of the Soviet Union. And they start saying, well, what do I have? What do I know that I can convert into an asset So some of these people would be starting to look around like they did in the Soviet Union and starting to say, what can I sell? What do I have that is a value that I can sell so that I can feed my people? I mean, that happened in spades over there. And so it's not far-fetched to believe that it might happen here in this growing uncertainty and chaotic space. And there's any number of crazy things that could come out of that. So there's almost certainly one or a couple more that I haven't thought about. But the thing that you have to kind of keep in mind is, as I've emphasized, is that this is really, really big event. If this thing is for real, then it is very, very large and it has huge impact. And it is extraordinarily disruptive. And in a sense, it shakes the very stability of the system. So much so that in our local situation, I went out and bought whole bunches of seeds, and I'm buying a whole bunch more so that we can generate our own food next year, and a group of us. And I'm feeling a sense of urgency about trying to get some of our emergency communications things up and running that we haven't yet been able to finish. But kind of the bottom line here and the purpose of all of this is to say that if you haven't thought about these kinds of things, and certainly something of this magnitude, and it fact shows up, then it generates nothing but fear. And you have not even had a chance to think about it, let alone do anything to prepare yourself. And so we're into a space, I think, and there's enough information to suggest that that it's coming together, and there's a point and an event that appears to be likely that is going to be unlike anything we've ever seen before in our lifetimes, and that we need to begin to prepare ourselves. And so as I get more information about this, I'll certainly come and talk more about it. But that's enough to keep all of our attention for a while, I think. So thank you.